Bear, and I am here to do a intro video for new players on character creation. This is not a deep dive. This is not a super high level video. I will try and do more kind of high level deep dive videos in the future if there is a need for it, but this video is just to talk about the absolute basics to get you started. The first thing that you're going to see is you're going to see the categories, melee spell specialist. For those of you who are free to play, these will probably be the only ones that you'll actually have an option to click on. Iconic mostly is for people that have either bought something or pay monthly for the game. It's also just way harder to get into as a starting point because every character that lives under this button starts at level 15, and it's way harder to learn the game when you're playing a character that's already pretty much functional. For today, I'm going to start with the melee tree. I'm going to go in. Actually, I'm not going to start with the melee tree. I'm going to start with the spell tree. I'm going to go in for wizard. I'm going to do this for a very specific reason that we're going to get to later. I'm going to go to this next button here. By the way, your gender, male, female, makes absolutely no difference. I always play as a male just because that way, it's the same as what people should be calling me. Path. This part is the worst thing that they have in this entire game. These three buttons, Ingenious Sage, Necromancer, Elementalist, it does not matter what class you choose, they are all lies. DDO lies to you, and it lies to you constantly, and it only really lies to you in ways that only really hurt new players. If the objective in a quest says to do something, yeah, you probably got to do it. But if it's something on this character creation screen, it's a lie. These are horrendously outdated concepts. As you get later on into your experience with the game, these are going to be, you're going to kind of assume that they'll match up with things called the enhancement trees, which really help you define and flesh out your build. This one is pretty much a one-to-one with one that's called Pale Master. It's just super out of date. I think the last time they updated these was certainly more than a decade ago, and most of them haven't been touched since the game came out, despite the game having very little in common with what it was like back then. But this one kind of has a one-to-one approximation. It's just a bad version of it. These two now live in the same tree, and this one isn't really supported as a build anymore. It's more of an additional thing every wizard kind of does. This is more of like a sorcerer identity that doesn't really happen in DDO anymore. So what you're going to do is you're literally always going to hit the customize button. It doesn't matter how much you're like, man, but I don't know how this class works. Human is the default, but it's really, really solid. It gets a bonus class every level. Sorry, a bonus skill rank every level and a bonus feat at level 1. And then you're going to kind of go around here and you're going to see things like, dwarf isn't super common. And look at this. DDO is lying to you again. Dwarves get a bonus to Constitution, but they get a negative to Charisma, and it doesn't say that on here. It's not lying about these abilities, but look, I'm hovering over them. It doesn't tell me what they do. Do you know what Dwarven Stone Cunning means? I've been playing this game forever. I have an idea, but I'm not 100% sure. I think it's their bonus to search when they're searching specifically for secret doors. But I don't know, because DDO just lies to you. This is something you'll get good at as you go, but honestly, it doesn't make a huge difference for your first character. You can never go wrong with human, but you won't hurt yourself too badly by picking another race. Generally speaking, you're probably going to want to pick a race that emphasizes your strength. So if you're a barbarian, you might want to be a half-orc because they get bonus strength. If you're playing a wizard, you might want to play a gnome because they get bonus intelligence. If you're playing a sorcerer, you might want to pick a tiefling because they get bonus charisma. But it doesn't make a huge difference. I'm going to pick human just so I can demonstrate things a little further next time. And next I'm going to go to look. DDO is lying to you again. This is not look. Look is one step in this next process. You click the look button and where do we go? Ability points. The critical thing in your looks, apparently. Now I am currently playing a wizard. We'll get more into class-specific stuff later on, but for now I'm going to go over the abilities and what they do. It says strength affects melee attack chance and damage. Yes, as a default, but it does not have to. Every single one of these stats, if you build your build right, can be used for both melee and I believe also for ranged attack and damage. Not 100% sure on strength or con. I don't believe con can be used for ranged damage. And strength, I think, can only be used for ranged damage, not for ranged attack. Con cannot be used for either. I believe it can only be used with dwarves for axes and hammers, but that's way too specific. As a basic, the default strength is going to affect how hard you hit and how often your hits actually hit the enemy, because DDO is using a dice roll system just like your tabletop D&D. When you successfully click your mouse and attack an enemy, it rolls dice to see if that attack hits, and as a default with a melee weapon, it is going to use strength to make that roll. Additionally, a lot of feats, particularly the two-handed fighting feats, are going to use strength as a prerequisite. To take the two-handed fighting feat, which we'll get into later, you're going to need a base of 15. And to get the improved versions, you might need a 17, and it'll go up as you get to higher levels, but it'll be pretty easy to hit as long as you're aware that it's coming. It'll also, as a very small side note, affect your carry capacity. You're not going to want to put points into strength for carry capacity, but you might want to put on a strength item for carry capacity, especially if you don't have a lot of extra bonuses from playing the game for a long time. Dexterity is going to affect armor class. It's not super important for everyone, but it's never bad. It's going to affect reflex saves. Those are important. They're not the most important thing in the world, but they're a nice bonus. And then it's going to affect your ranged attack chance. And they also changed it later to affect your ranged damage and didn't put it on character creation. So if you are trying to play an archer or a crossbowman, you need high dexterity unless you've got a solid plan for how you're changing that source of attack and damage out. Constitution is the only stat absolutely every character needs. Can you play the game with low Constitution? Yes. Is it ever better than not having Is it ever better than having Constitution? Absolutely not. Constitution affects hit points. Every level you get your Constitution modifier added to your hit points, and often those are going to be multiplied by things like at level 12, all of the melee classes builds are going to get an enhancement that gives them an extra 25%, and your Constitution affects that. There's a lot of stances that can increase your hit points by a percentage of their base, and this counts for that. It's also going to affect your fortitude saves. This is frequently going to be your saves against things like instant death, or being poisoned and made helpless, or stunned and made helpless. It's a pretty big deal to have a bad Constitution. This is usually going to be one of your better stats. Next up is intelligence. This one, actually, unironically, DDO isn't lying to you here. It's doing a pretty good job. There's a couple things it's missing, but it's doing a good job. Intelligence, every modifier to your intelligence increases the skill points you get at every level. It is not retroactive. That means if you increase your intelligence, you don't go back and get a bunch of bonus skills. So if you didn't have a 16 intelligence, but instead had a 15 intelligence for the first 3 levels, then put another point into your intelligence at level 4, well, now you get that bonus skill, but you don't get to go back and add them for the levels that you missed. Additionally, it's going to talk about spellcasting for wizards, alchemists, and artificers. It's going to increase something called your difficulty check. Basically, the idea is just it makes it harder for enemies to resist your spells. It makes you better at landing your spells. It's also going to wind up being very important for rogues. This is what they don't really tell you about. It's going to affect your trapping skills, which, while there's going to be very experienced players that are going to tell you don't necessarily need intelligence for that, that relies a lot on you having really solid equipment, good past lives, game knowledge, and a lot of other factors that are unlikely to be true for your first time playing the game. Beyond that, however, this is actually a pretty good description. There's a feat later that'll let you use your intelligence instead of your dexterity for your reflex saves. But that's not as default. That's just an option you can do later on. Wisdom. Wisdom is going to affect your will saves. You can argue will saves are maybe the most important ones, because while Fortitude is kind of some of the instant deaths, some of the instant deaths are also will saves. It's also your things like your paralysis spells that are generally will saves. So your very common things that can just take you out of a fight, like command or hold person or hold monster or slow, these are all going to be tied to your will save. This is your spellcasting ability for clerics, druids, paladins, and rangers. That's true, but we don't care about paladins and rangers. You can just get an item and replace 100% of the input from wisdom. There is one build for rangers that is obsessed with wisdom, but that's too niche for this video. Clerics and druids, however, yes, absolutely. They also updated the favored soul class so that they can use wisdom instead of charisma for basically everything that they do. So this is an option for that as well. It is also going to... They're talking about key regeneration for monks. No, that's not true. But it is going to affect those DCs, how hard it is to resist a lot of your monk abilities. It's going to feed into your defenses as a monk. A lot of stronger monk builds are going to wind up using wisdom to hit and damage. So wisdom is super important for monks, just not for the reason that they say it is. Charisma. Charisma is a very, very polarizing one. It's used for your social skills. Now, unlike, again, a lot of people who are coming to play this game now have played games like Baldur's Gate before, and social skills are a way that you can just kind of get through huge portions of the game. That's not the case in DDO. In DDO, social skills are for bonuses, optional objectives, extra loot, things like that, easier fights. There's a lot of uses for it, but it's not by any means a replacement for being an effective combat character. Additionally, for many classes, we're talking here sorcerer, bards, and favored souls, great. Also, warlocks have been a class for a long time, and they just haven't been included here. They are also affected by this. It is the same idea about your DCs is going to be fed from your charisma for those classes. Additionally, there is a feat called Insightful Reflexes that gives you intelligence instead of dexterity for reflex saves. There's one called Force of Personality that lets you use charisma for will saves instead of wisdom. Again, it's niche. It comes into the game later. It's not something that's super important to focus on. It's just for your awareness. Additionally, these three skills, we kind of call them your mental skills: intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. I'm sorry, I should be more precise. These are your stats, not your skills. Skills is a different page. Your intelligence, your wisdom, and your charisma. If you are a spellcaster that is using these as your stat, and you do not have a high enough stat, so if I keep playing this wizard, right, wizards need intelligence, and I stay as 8 intelligence, when I get into the game, I will not be allowed to cast spells. If I go to 11 intelligence, I can cast your absolute basic first level spells. 12 second level spells, 13 third level spells, 14 fourth level spells. It goes all the way up to 19 with 9th level spells. It does not go higher than that. And it depends on the class. Some of them only need 16 or 14. However, it is not hard to reach those. It's just something to be aware of for the early game. So, for example, I don't really recommend paladins invest in wisdom, but you do need to be aware of it, because by level 4, you should be finding some way to get your wisdom up to 11 just so you get your spells. You don't need more than that, right? You'll need, at I believe 8th level, you'll need 12 wisdom, 11th level 13, and 14th level 14 wisdom. It's not hard to get to. It's just something to keep in mind. It's the same thing for rangers. They have the exact same scaling because they only have 4 levels. The other thing that you're going to see up here at the top, mine says champion, 32-point build. Yours is not going to say that. It is going, well, it might if you're not quite that new, but it might say adventurer, 28-point build. This is an extra bonus. There's a lot of ways to get it, and there is no reason to buy it. You can unlock it for free on every server, those extra 4 points. And if you do something called a true reincarnation, you're just going to bypass that mechanic entirely. And everybody does that in this game, so do not worry about it. It'll take you a little bit to get you there the first time, but after that, you will be fine. I'm just going to give you my kind of default wizard stuff. I'm going to put a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, and move on. Next is the skills section. Now, the skills are a lot when you look at them, but ultimately, this is not the most impactful screen in the game. These all have a purpose, except for this one. We don't like this one. This one is bad. This has a couple of uses in the entire game, but they are pretty much never worth putting points into. There are some very niche edge cases where you will use this, but do not do this unless you know exactly why you're doing it. There are some skills here that are going to be important for literally every character in the game. Say hello to your best friend. It's jump. Jump is how we play this game. You can play this game without jumping once, but every single person will play better if they learn how to use this skill. You don't always necessarily fully invest into this skill, as many builds will hit something called the jump cap very quickly without putting any points in. But if you're playing a build like, for example, a wizard that might struggle to get there, you're going to want to put some points in. Or if you want to kind of hit it sooner for one reason or another, you can put some points in. That's going to come down to kind of play style, when you have trouble, how well you know your build, and 1,000,001 other things. Generally speaking, jump is good, and it's very important. Tumble was also recently buffed. It's just a great thing to have, but it's also something you've got to get used to playing with. So play around with it. If you like it, great. If you find that you don't know how to use it, don't invest in it. I personally do, so I'm going to put points in it. Use Magic Device. If you get to the threshold where it is useful, it is an incredibly good skill. It lets you do things like, I'm a wizard, but I can cast a whole bunch of cleric spells, because clerics have awesome spells like bringing people back from the dead, freedom of movement, or death ward. And if you want to just bring some scrolls of that, great. Now you have access to a lot of that utility just by using this skill, even though you're not the right class for it. That's not just true of cleric. Obviously, there's a lot of ones from lots of different classes that will be use Magic Device no matter what your build is. However, this one is kind of the hardest skill to boost, so for new players, it may not actually be worth it to invest in. Unless it's a class skill, which we'll get into in a minute, or if you're a charisma build, you might have trouble getting it up. Just like with Tumble, play around with it. See if you like it. See if it actually is doing something for you. And if it isn't, stop investing in it. All right, so now we're going to go into the key ability section here. All this is it tells you what core stats modifier. So if we go back here, the modifier is this over here, not this over here. This is calculated based on this, but it is not the same thing. The math on this one is subtract 10, divide by 2, round down, but you don't necessarily need to know that. All you need to know is these numbers are the ones that are going to get added for this. So my intelligence is a +4, so for repair, we're not going to invest in repair. But for repair, I have 4 to start with, even with no points being spent. Next thing we're going to talk about is class skills versus cross-class skills. Your class skills are the ones that do not have an asterisk at the end of them. Your cross-class skills are the ones that do have an asterisk at the end of them. What you need to know about them is that they are hugely impactful for how many points you can wind up putting in. If I put 1 point into Spellcraft here, I have 1 rank. If I put 1 rank into Balance here, I have half a rank. If I click this button and hold it until it's maximized, 4 ranks. If I click this button and hold it, 2 ranks. You get half as much effectiveness out of a non-class skill as you do a class skill. If you ever get into something called multi-classing, you will retain class skills from all of your skills, but only for each individual level. That's a little more complicated than the scope of this video. We'll get into that later if it's necessary. Next up, we're going to go into something called trained-only skills. I'm going to take some points out of these guys down here. So you're going to look down this list. You're going to say 3, 4, 4, 1, -1, -1, -1. We're not very good at talking to people. But as we scroll down here, we're going to see a few that aren't numbers. N/A, N/A, N/A. That's not applicable. Basically, what that means is if you don't put a rank into this skill and have a positive modifier in total in it, you cannot even attempt to use the skill. So if you're a bard and you don't put 1 point into perform, you can't play your instrument. You don't know how. So you're going to need that point. I'm a wizard. I don't need that. I'm taking it away. If you have not practiced how to do a shoulder roll or a somersault or whatever, a flip or whatever other tumble things your character is winding up doing, you can't try it. You need a point to try it. And see how now I have a positive modifier. If I were to take this character in, they could tumble. Same thing with use magic device. If you have never tried to activate a scroll you know nothing about, you cannot activate a scroll you know nothing about. So I'm going to put a point in. Now, it's negative. I still won't be able to do it. Now it's positive. I'm going to put all those back in. Got balance. Last thing we're going to go over. I'm sorry, I did not mention the jump cap is 40. Next thing we're going to go over is some of the ones that give spell power. The critical one is spellcraft because it gives it to the vast majority of your different spells. Spell power is a percentage amplifier of the base damage done by a spell. So if I have 50 spell power and my fireball did 50 damage, it's going to add an extra 25 on top of that 50 for a total of 75. Every single point of spellcraft gives you another point in all of the spell powers except for the ones listed here. These other ones that are listed here, positive energy, negative energy, sonic repair, and rust, are going to be attached to other spell powers. Repair and rust is attached to repair. They're both really bad spell powers. Repair does genuinely have a use, but only for Warforged characters or artificers taking feats that let them be healed by repair. That's very niche, and even then, you can often full heal yourself with a single spell without investing in this skill, and therefore it makes no difference. Rust is a type of spell damage that's only useful against mechanical enemies. Well, there's not enough mechanical enemies to want to invest that heavily into that kind of spell. If you enjoy it, great, good for you. Play with it. But objectively, this one is just bad. Your positive and negative energy spells are going to be affected the same way spellcraft is by the heal skill. So if you want to be a healer, that's positive energy. If you want to be a necromancer, that's negative energy. Either of those, you want the heal skill. It'll make your spells stronger. The last one, sonic, is affected by perform. That's often really just bards that are huge fans of sonic damage, but for bards, it's enormous. And for bards, you're really going to want to maximize that perform skill. As I am a wizard, I'm going to be casting a lot of spells that are going to be affected by spellcraft, so I'm going to keep my points here. There are class-specific examples of all of these. For example, for monks, concentration is the most important skill in the game because it's super influential for your class's core mechanic. But that's not universal enough. I'm not going to talk about that right now. So I'm going to assign a few more points randomly. I'm going to say swim, so I swim faster and hold my breath longer. The holding your breath isn't a huge problem, but the swimming faster is pretty nice. And then I'm playing a wizard. I'm going to go heal, so I have the option to be a necromancer, and I'm going to say balance, just because I want to stand up faster after I get knocked over. Next, we are on to the feats page. The feats page feels like the most important thing you do on your character. It is, but it also isn't. This is going to kind of be how we help define our category of character. It's not going to tell us exactly how we play, but it is going to put us in a region of play that we are going to be building within. So there's a few categories of feats that I'm going to talk about, but for the most part, it's take a look at them, read them, try to plan ahead. You're going to get one of these at level 1, and then you're going to get one at 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30, and 33. If you notice, that's 1 and then every number divisible by 3. If you remember it better that way, great, do it that way. If you prefer to memorize the numbers, great, do it that way. You are also going to get, I'm playing a human, so I have this human bonus feat. It's just an extra freebie at level 1. Doesn't happen again, but at level 1, I get an extra one. I also can get, depending on your class, you may get bonus class feats. Fighter gets one at level 1 and every even level, but it's picked from a special list of martial combat feats. Things like this here, single weapon fighting, or stunning blow, or all, well, they won't get these weapon proficiencies because they'll get them for free. You can't actually see that, but these will show up. None of these should. And I'm actually not meeting a lot of the prerequisites because I'm not built to get them. So I'm going to go into show unavailable and look at all this. Look at this madness. Look at all of this. You could take all of these, not in the same character, but like eventually. And also you shouldn't take a lot of them because a lot of them are bad. But you can see a lot of these feats here are going to wind up in this category being fighter bonus feats. You can tell something is an acceptable bonus feat for your class because it'll show up in yellow. So if you notice, none of these guys are yellow here. So I'm going to uncheck this. Look at this, augment summoning yellow, mental toughness yellow, all of these spell focuses yellow. You're going to notice because I am a wizard, wizard bonus feats tend to be about spell casting. But combat casting, spell penetration, not every spell casting feat is going to be a bonus feat for wizard. Not every class gets bonus feats, and some of them get special bonus feats that are not picked from anything on the general list. You will be able to figure all of that out as you go, and that's just an experience and game knowledge thing. This category here, meta magic feats, most of these are good. This one is bad. You don't like this one. It sucks. It's really bad. All it does is save you platinum. But once you've played the game for a little bit, and I mean a little bit, platinum stops mattering. The game's economy really doesn't run on platinum. The cost of the material components of spells is next to nothing. Maximize spell and empower spell are both going to make your spells dramatically more damaging, but they're also going to make your spells cost a lot more spell points per cast. So take, for example, a very basic spell might cost you 4 to 10 spell points. But if I maximize it, I get 150% bonus of the base damage. That's a lot, but it also costs an extra 25 spell points per cast. So that's not efficient at that level. But if you're left with leftover spell points at the end, or you need to kill enemies faster, not more efficiently, these are going to be your thing. Quicken spell is going to only cost an extra 10. That's fairly low for a meta magic. And it's going to make your spells cast super fast and not be interruptible by regular damage. Basically, if you cast a spell and somebody hits you while you're doing it, you make a roll with the concentration skill. And if you fail the roll, you lose the spell and the spell points and the time you spent casting it. With Quicken Spell, that just doesn't happen. Extend spell, this one's very niche. If you happen to be playing a build that uses a lot of short-term combat buffs and or have some extra feats at the end, you might wind up taking this one. It's also 10 spell points and doubles the lengths of your buff spells. Also some other spells, but primarily this is about your buff spells for newer players. Enlarge spell, this one you've really got to know how to use because it doubles the range on most spells. Very notably, it does not double the range on things like cone spells, because cone spells have a pre-programmed shape and size, and this just won't interact with them. It does not double the radius of a spell like Fireball. Instead, it just lets the Fireball travel further before it explodes at the same size. It is genuinely useful on quite a few builds, but you have to know why you're taking it and be playing kind of the right builds for it. Power spell and maximize spell we already talked about. There's going to be other ones that are going to show up later, so let me bring those up. I'm going to come down here. Heighten spell. This one is the hardest one to understand. Basically, it makes low-level spells cost more, but be harder to resist. This one's weird because very often most builds won't be casting their lower level spells at those higher levels when this becomes more relevant. So be careful with this one because very frequently you're going to find it's actually doing nothing for you. But if you are using it, it can be very effective to make your spells harder to resist. I'm going to turn these back off. The other big category that we need to talk about is combat styles. Now, I only have this one available to me. There's more than that. We're going to go back in here. We're going to go to combat styles. And you can see here it's a pretty beefy section. This ultimately breaks down into 5 key styles. One of them is single weapon fighting. The theme of single weapon fighting is I'm holding my weapon in my main hand. My offhand is, generally speaking, nothing. There are ways that you can work around it. You're also allowed to wield orbs, rune arms, or no, just orbs or rune arms as default in the offhand. But your weapon style is one weapon and nothing else in your melee combat. This one is going to mechanically make you attack faster and do more damage. It's solid. It's worth trying out. It's a lot of fun to play. I'm not going to talk about meta things because that will make the video have very much so a lifespan. It'll become dated. It will die out. So I'm not going to tell you whether single weapon fighting is good or bad or in between right now because that won't matter, right, in a few years if new players are still using this video. The next that we're going to talk about is two-handed fighting. This is your great weapon. This is your big axe. This is your big sword, your big hammer, anything like that. Where is it? Two-handed fighting. This one has its core mechanic called strike through. It's a new mechanic only for two-handed fighting. You're not going to get this in the other styles. Basically what it is I'm not just hitting you, I'm hitting the guy next to you as I cut through you into him. It's also going to increase the damage that you get from your kind of the ability that you're adding to your damage. And the higher the level of this feat that you take, the more it's going to multiply that ability. Next up, we're going to go two-weapon fighting. So this is your sword in each hand, or axe in each hand, or sword and dagger, or the one that just happens to be very popular right now, two daggers or dagger equivalents. Again, not a meta discussion, but two weapons. This one really, really fixates on being able not just to get the hit with your main hand, but increasing the chance that every hit with your main hand also throws a hit from the other hand. That hit is not going to be as strong as the main hand one, but it will wind up being fairly close once you get invested into it. You can get that total up to 100%, but you have to build for it to a certain extent. At that point, every time you click the attack button, you're actually hitting them twice. Next up is Shield Mastery. Oh, I went right past it. Shield Mastery. Shield Mastery is being just really good at having a shield on you. It's going to increase a lot of your defensive stats and your offensive stats. It's a very balanced thing to add on to characters. The one problem with DDO is that while you want to have a fairly well-rounded character, specialization is key. Shield Mastery is not bad, it's just uncommon, and it's usually used either for tanks or in conjunction with another fighting style, which is not normally possible, but Shield Mastery specifically can be used in very niche cases with both single weapon fighting and with two weapon fighting. Not at the same time as these two, but this and this, or this and this. Those cases are very specific. They'd be two-handed fighting using a bastard sword or a dwarven axe, which count even when wielded in one hand, or when using single weapon fighting with the bard swashbuckler style, will, after a few levels, let you have a tiny little buckler shield in your offhand. The last one we're going to talk about is the weird one. You're possibly noticing there isn't another style in here. That's correct. It is a class-specific combat style because only Druid gets to use natural fighting style. Natural fighting is, honestly, it's the weirdest one by far. It's the only one. You can take it at level 3, and then you can take it again at level 6, and you can take it again at level 9. That is not normal. Even for the classes that get these the fastest, let's say Fighter. Fighter can get level 1, or for all of these, can get level 1, then level 6, and then theoretically, this is hard to finagle, but level 11. Usually they'll actually get it at level 12, but if you really wanted to do it for science, you could get this at level 11. The big thing about Druid is it gets their fighting style super, super fast. So in the early game, they do get access to really strong attacks. It does all just kind of balance out by the time you get to the harder parts of the game. So do not worry if you're like, oh man, I want to get a little stronger early. It's not worth it if that's the reason you're doing it. It's just a fun little bonus that you know now. These are primarily mutually exclusive with each other, meaning you can't, even if you have a two-handed weapon and you're fighting in an animal form, you can't double dip on that. You used to be able to, and it was a lot of fun, but it was also ridiculously overpowered, so they changed it. I did talk about a couple exceptions to that already, but those are really the only exceptions that exist, and those are very specific. These are also going to come with some pretty hefty requirements. They're not hard to get to, but they're very important that you get to the one that you're going for if you're going for a martial class. I'm currently playing a wizard. I'm probably not going to take any of these unless I'm doing a very weird specific build. But let's say I'm instead I want to play a two-weapon fighting monk. I want a comma in each hand. If I don't have dexterity of 15, I can't take the fighting style. Okay, that's not too hard. But then we get up to the second one, and now that dexterity requirement has jumped up to 17. If you're not planning for it, this might catch you by surprise and really slow you down. The other thing that you're going to look at is you're going to see that second line of requires is +6 base attack bonus. Base attack bonus is a weird mechanic that exists in this game. It's existed in 3.5 and Pathfinder and all its contemporaries, but it doesn't really exist in some of the more modern Dungeons and Dragons games that a lot of people coming into the game now are more familiar with. You can kind of think of it like a more scaling proficiency bonus. Your martial classes, so your fighters, paladins, barbarians, rangers, and all of these other classes that are really all about fighting, it's just their level. It's the same as their level. If you're a level 7 fighter, you have a 7 base attack bonus. You have to do some math for some of the other classes. A lot of your spellcaster-only classes, Wizard being a great example, is half your level rounded down. So right now, this character has a base attack bonus of 0. So if I come down to a feat like Power Attack, oh, they changed that requirement. Never mind. But some feats are going to have a base attack bonus 1 requirement, and I can't take it at level 1. I'm going to have to wait until level 2, where I don't get a feat. So then I'm going to have to wait till level 3, and you can kind of see how not planning your base attack bonus, not planning for your base attack bonus can start causing you problems. It gets even more extreme when we get all the way up here to greater 2-weapon fighting. Look at that 11 base attack bonus. Well, if you're keeping an eye out, Wizard has half their level as base attack bonus. At level 20, which is the maximum level for any class in the game, you still can't take this. Now, that's not to say you can never get it. We have our epic levels that do increase our base attack bonus. So once you go past level 20 and you're no longer playing just a wizard, you're now an epic wizard. Yeah, you can 100% pick this up, but it's so much later, right? You're talking about picking this up at level 21 or level 24, as opposed to a fighter who's picking it up at level 12, right? You're running into these same problems. So planning out this in advance is often very crucial to making sure that your build takes off on a reasonable time frame. All right, I am going to briefly mention that there's stuff up at the top here, these epic feats, and if we scroll down, we get into some other stuff that doesn't even show up yet. There should be another category in here, like destiny feats, and there's legendary feats. You don't need to worry about that stuff yet. All of that is after level 20. So if you do check this show unavailable, you can just close that down. You're not worrying about any of that yet. I am going to pick feats for this character. I'm playing a spellcaster, so I'm going to probably go with maximize, and I'm going to go with, it came back up here, and I'm going to go with empower, and I'm going to go with quicken. There are a lot of feats that are new player traps. I have not talked at all about this category, this whole category here. There are maybe 2 skills in 2 feats in here that you would ever take. Maybe 3. I think Snake Blood, Discipline, and Luck of Heroes actually have a reason for existing, but all of them were added way later, and they're super niche, and you do not need to think about this area. You can close this as well. If you are struggling with your, I don't know, let's say your spellcraft skill, you're like, man, I really wish I had a little bit more spellcraft. Put an item on. Get a tome for it. Do a couple of epic sagas. They'll do exactly this permanently, forever, for every version of this character you ever play, and you're not spending a core feat on it. You do not want any of these feats unless you have a very good reason for taking it, and my move silently isn't very high right now is not a good reason to take it. There are better ways to boost those skills. This is just inefficient. Augment summoning. A lot of people I know actually do have a lot of fun with this, but it's not generally good, right? Combat casting, this can be replaced with quicken spell. Mental toughness, this is an inconsequential number of spell points. It will not matter at all. Mobile spellcasting, you can replace this by jumping. Just jumping replaces this feat completely. As you cast spells, jump, and this feat no longer makes a difference. You're moving at the same speed, right? And that's just this kind of region. You will learn as you go. You will see as you go. Many of these, you're going to kind of figure out what the good and the bad ones are, and you'll get help from other people, and maybe we'll do a deep dive at some point, but that's not what this is for. Next up, spells. For wizards specifically, spells are based on your intelligence modifier, so if you have a higher intelligence, you'll get more spells. That is not true for every class. This one is very class specific, so do not expect it to look exactly like this. The one thing I want to talk about, just not because it's on topic, but just because it's important. This spell, we do not use this spell, not because it's completely useless. It does work. It functions exactly the way it says it should function. It's just everyone's going to be really mad at you if you cast it, because what it does is it makes the people that you want to come group up together so you can fight them all at once. You can blow them up in a fireball. You can cleave around. You can hit and get rid of all the monsters. It makes them run away and stand in a corner where you have to run over and go smack them individually, and it just slows everything down. Instead, you're going to want to use just about anything else. Charm Person and all of the charm spells have uses, but they're niche. It's going to be usually kind of the same effect as Cause Fear. I want to kill that monster. You've made it a friend. I need you to fix that, is like a very common thing that you're going to hear. A lot of these spells are useful and interchangeable. Some of them are not, but you're just going to figure that out as you play. So I'm just going to grab a few spells. Expeditious Retreat, movement speed is the best stat in the game. Jump, best skill in the game. Maybe I'll grab this and this just for fun. Doesn't make a huge difference. This is just an overview. If you've messed something up, it might show up here, but honestly, when I'm making a character, I just skip right past it because I know what I'm doing. This is the appearance. The appearance doesn't matter. Names have to be unique. You do not need a surname, but you can have one. A lot of people like to put jokes in here, so if you're looking for a good time, inspect people's surnames and see what they've got in there. Alignment is the last part of character creation that matters. If you don't have a reason to be something else, be neutral. As a defensive standpoint, neutral is the best alignment because no spell is super effective against you. If you kind of think about it the way we think about Pokemon, if you're playing a lawful good character, then evil and chaotic spells deal bonus damage and have extra effects against you. If you change it to lawful neutral, well, now it's only chaotic spells that have extra effects against you. If you change it to neutral good, now it's Change it to neutral good, now it's only evil spells that have extra effects against you. If you change it to neutral, everything's just at its base normal level. There are certain classes, monk, paladin, barbarian, bard, and more, that are going to have alignment requirements. That's okay. There are also going to be specific builds that are going to want specific alignments because there are niche benefits for them. That's okay. But if you don't have a reason to be something else, be neutral. With that said, that is character creation in a nutshell. I am at this point going to go back and give a quick overview of some of the class identities. I didn't start with that because it's a little too specific, and I wanted it to be a little bit more accessible. But now we're going to go and we're going to talk about what each class is like. The first one, I'm going to go in alphabetical order so as not to show any favoritism, is Alchemist. Alchemist is throwing bombs at people, using poison knives, and transmuting your enemies into gold. They have very low hit points, but they have enormous damage and utility. This one is a little more complicated than most of the classes in the game, but it can be a lot of fun to play. So play at your own risk, but also play for your own reward. Second class, alphabetically, Artificer. This is your machine class. This is your lightning in a bottle class. This is crossbows, arm-mounted cannons, building a robot, building a turret, things like that. And you get a little robot buddy. It's a little dog-shaped robot. It's not very strong, but hey, it's fun. This guy can actually play pretty much every role in the game effectively, but playing some roles as an artificer is a little harder. Artificers also get a almost unique ability to handle traps. The only classes in the game that can handle traps are Artificer and Rogue. If you don't have one of these classes, you're just going to have to try to avoid traps the old-fashioned way or run right through them. Next up alphabetically in the melee category, Barbarian. You're angry, you're beefy, you like big weapons and hitting things really hard. You're also just really hard to kill. They don't have a lot of good options for ranged, and they're frequently weak to crowd control magic. Not always, but generally speaking, they're a little more susceptible than a lot of other classes are. Next up, back to specialist, we have Bard. You sing a little song, the bad guys do a little dance, you freeze them in the Arctic winds of your skaldic heritage, and you play as a fancy pirate. You also explode people's eardrums. Bards are a fantastic class for new players because they get to try a little bit of everything. And even if you build a bard really badly, if you do everything wrong, you still have bard buffs. The bardic ballad is it's like the heroine of D&D. Once you've played with it, you always want to play with it. You can do nothing in a group but sing bard buffs, and people will love it. Obviously, they'd like it more if you're also killing half of the enemies in the quest, but just giving people buffs is a great way to make people like having you around. If you're not confident in your skill, this can be a great way to help while learning. If you enjoy the aesthetic, it's a great aesthetic. If you like versatility, it's incredibly versatile. And it's good at just about every role it plays. It's also got those unique buffs that are so powerful. We are going to move on to, in the spellcasting tree, we have Cleric. Clerics are channeling divine power to heal party members. That's what we think of, but that's not realistically usually what a cleric is. Usually what a cleric is calling down divine power to smite massive groups of evil creatures at a range. They can also get into your kind of war priest kind of cleric identity. Usually in the history of DDO, that has not been very effective, but it is not unsupported. It's just not usually very strong. Next up, in the same tree, we have Druid. Druid is a very versatile class because you can build it to play as a massive, beefy bear, hence my name. You can use it to play as a quick wolf with lots of sneak attack themes and huge attack speed, or you can play it as an elemental. You can eventually turn into a fire or water elemental, and you can just throw a tsunami at people or conjure earthquakes. It's a very powerful class generally, mostly because it's always able to do any role. Next up is Favored Soul. Favored Souls, they don't necessarily pray for divine power. They're more of like the chosen one concept. They do all of the same ideas as Cleric, with a few changes here and there. Generally speaking, again, very big simplification for those of you who know a little more, but Favored Souls cast faster and more per rest or more per quest, but they have less spells, right? So you don't have as much of a versatility, you don't have as many options, but you have more resources and you cast faster. Generally speaking, these two are pretty similar, and usually there's one that's just better than the other. As this video is being made, most people are playing Cleric if they're playing it for like the traditional sense. This isn't bad. This just right now has some extra tools. Next up, Fighter. Fighter is a very neutral class. You're really good at fighting, and the big identity for Fighter is combat tactics. If you like the idea of knocking people over, stunning them, breaking their armor, making them unable to fight back, and then just beating on them when they can't resist, Fighter is a great class for you. they get 1,000,000 feats. They get more feats than anybody else. And with that, they can build to do many different things or be extraordinarily good at one thing. General tip in DDO, if you can be not necessarily a one-trick pony, but a one-zone pony, you're going to do a lot better than if you're just kind of okay at everything. So you're probably going to want to go all in on those combat tactics and melee damage, or go all in on being a tank, right? Next up, monk. Martial artist, philosopher, and existence manipulator. Monks are big fans of your gravity-defying kicks, but also they, at super high levels, can disbelieve an entire room full of enemies into not existing anymore. They are an incredibly fast class. They move fast, they can dash all over the place, they're great at tumbling, they do lots of acrobatics, and that's how they fight. They are a very interesting class because they're very non-traditional in their play style and their progression to every other martial, even though they are very distinctly a martial class. Just a note from monks, while they are very fast and very fun, they're often very challenging to build well. I will also say, as this video is being made, we know that there is a monk rework coming up, and there's a lot of people saying a lot of things about the monk rework, so this may become outdated very quickly. Next up after monk, I shouldn't have left that, is paladin. Paladin is channeling divinity once again, but they're doing it to smite you in the face with a sword. They're especially good against devils, demons, undead, and evil enemies, but that doesn't make them bad against anyone else. It just makes them super good against them. The crazy thing about paladin is they kind of get a lot of the best of all worlds, right? They're incredibly good for just doing a lot of damage, but they get insane defenses and great healing opportunities. But the problem that they run into is they have to make a lot of tough calls. As a paladin, your feats are going to be very, very sparse. You're not necessarily going to be able to get everything that you might want. You're going to be pulled in a lot of directions in your build, and you're going to have to choose a few things to maybe say, hey, I'm not going to be so good at this. This is one of my recommendations for a new player, despite the fact that they need a lot of stats to be effective, just because they're so solid at keeping themselves alive while still getting things done, that they are just a very forgiving class in a lot of situations. Next up, we're going to come back out here down to specialist, and we're going to take a look at ranger. Ranger is a very versatile class that specialize primarily in archery and dual wielding weapons. They have a lot of kind of wilderness themes about them. The Tempest style Ranger is a extraordinarily effective 2-weapon fighting build that often winds up hitting more than one enemy, much like a 2-handed fighter would, while 2-weapon fighting. Right? They're very, very interesting to play, but it's often a little harder to get going. You also get Deepwood Stalkers, which kind of are about sneak attack with bows and standing still to get the right shot, things like that. And then you get Arcane Archers, which is thematically one of the most popular ideas, which is imbuing arrows to paralyze, burn, electrocute, or just outright kill various enemies. Basically, I cast spells with my bow. Not exactly that, but close to it. That one can be a little hard to build, but it can be also very fun to play. Rogue, next up, this is the ultimate skill monkey. They get a crazy number of skill points. They love intelligence, which gives them even more skills. You're going to be swimming in skill points, and depending on how you build, you may not even have enough good skills to spend skill points on. This is going to run into your assassins, your acrobatic quarterstaff builds, and also your kind of mechanics with crossbows and traps. I will say, traps are not super strong on the player side. Like a player placing traps is not a very strong mechanic in DDO. It has not been for a very long time. But the people that I know that like playing with traps love playing with traps. You have to really invest into it, and it will never be effective in a group. But a lot of people love it, so I'm not going to fully discount it as an idea just because it makes some people very happy to do. This one, their core mechanic is sneak attack. So when for some reason, whether you're behind an enemy or flanking an enemy, or you've feinted an enemy, or you've convinced an enemy you're not a threat, and you're still hitting them, you get a lot of bonus damage that does scale with a lot of your other modifiers that can make them just tear enemies apart. Next up, Sorcerer. Sorcerers, they're born like this. They get incredible magic powers, but they specialize very, very heavily. You're not really going to see a sorcerer whipping out fireballs and snowball swarms because, well, they're really good at fireballs and they tend to melt their own snowballs before they even hit. It's just not very effective. So, sorcerer's identity is all about specializing really hard in one aspect of combat magic. Generally speaking, elemental combat magic. So the primary subclasses that you're basically going to be picking from are focused on fire damage, cold damage, electric damage, or acid damage. There's another one, but that one's really, really hard to build, and we're not going to get into that yet. They are going to eventually go through elemental apotheosis and become elementals of their element and be able to say, you are an elemental made of fire, and I'm still going to burn you to death because I'm just that good at fire magic. Or I'm going to freeze this glacier, and that's going to make it go away. It doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's cool, and it's fun to play. Next up is, I left it again. Warlock, making deals with entities beyond mortal ken. Warlocks kind of bridge the gap between traditional spellcasters and physical DPS, where they kind of play a lot like a physical DPS class or occasionally a tank class, but have a lot of the damage types and a lot of the abilities of a spellcaster. For those of you who are aware of Eldritch Blast meme, yeah, it's still happening. It happens here too. That's most of what you do is Eldritch Blast. However, you can change the shape of your Eldritch Blast. So if you want your Eldritch Blast to be everybody in a cone in front of me, great, you've got it. If you want your Eldritch Blast to be an aura radiating out from you every few seconds while you do other things with your life because you have better things to do, great, go for it. If you want your Eldritch Blast to be like a chain lightning where it jumps from enemies even as you're starting your next one, great, you've got that, right? If you want your Eldritch Blast to sap the brains out of the person that you're, great, you've got whatever you want to do with Eldritch Blast, it's doable with Warlock. It's very, very versatile, but you can only do one at a time. So it's versatile in what you can do, but it's not versatile in what you are doing moment to moment. They also get some very cool abilities, like giving opponents a one-way trip to hell. But there's a lot of very niche stuff that goes into building Warlocks, so it might be a little hard to get started. Last up is, why do I keep leaving, is Wizard. Wizard is the most versatile spellcaster. They learn spells as they level. They can write spells into their spell book. They can prepare new spells absolutely constantly. And they're not really bad at anything. The only problem with Wizard is that it just doesn't have a lot of the specialty that Sorcerer does. What Wizard, therefore, tends to specialize in as an identity in DDO is the things that Sorcerer doesn't get bonuses to, which is things like crowd control, so mass paralysis spells, or disco balls that make rooms of enemies dance, or necromancy. If you want to turn into a lich, do not play a sorcerer, play a wizard. If you want to summon the undead, do not play a sorcerer, play a wizard. If you want to kill people with pure death energy, don't play a sorcerer, play a wizard. Beyond that, I will say that there are things called archetypes. So if I click on Druid here, you'll notice it pops out Druid and Blightcaster. We're not going to worry about the archetypes yet because they tend to just be a variant on the class. Some of them are incredibly powerful, but they still usually kind of fold in the broader sense to their core class. Right, so whereas Druid is themed around the kind of powerful but more accessible parts of nature, like bears and wolves and fire and water, Blightcaster is going to kind of hone in on acid and poison and insects, and it's a lot more of the darker stuff, but it's still fundamentally the same concept that a Druid is about. It's an alternate playstyle for the same core identity. With that said, that is all that I'm going to be talking about today. I hope that this was helpful, and I just want to remind everybody that DDO is a game that's all about game knowledge. So the more you learn, the better you will do. Obviously, that's true to a certain extent at everything we do. The more you know, the more you can do. But DDO, so much of the skill expression is about just knowing more and more. And so if you just keep your mind open, you keep learning as you play, that difficulty curve will start leveling off and you'll start feeling like you're doing well. I want to let you know that this game is by far my favorite game. It's the only game that I've played continuously since I started when I was a kid. And I think really the primary things that hold it back, one of the big ones is just it's hard to get started. So this is an attempt to help people get started. Thank you, and good luck playing. When you go over to stats here, you're going to see this all 12. Do not do this. This is basically just the game saying, hey, you're going to pick this on your own. Race matters, but it does not matter as much as people think it does, especially those of you who are coming in from your 5th edition D&D, from any edition of D&D, or from games like Baldur's Gate, or from Wrath of the Righteous, or any of these other kind of like big RPG video games or tabletop games. DDO, this matters, and depending on your build, it can be crucial, but it's not usually it's not the second thing you mention, right? When you're playing D&D, you're usually kind of or Pathfinder or anything like that, you're usually talking about like, oh, what do you play? I play a human fighter. I play a half-orc barbarian, right? I play a gnome oracle, right? It doesn't matter as much to the point where you're saying the race in the build, but it will still matter